Hi there, and welcome to another episode. Today we have a very interesting guest, as always, someone different, someone unusual, someone with a wonderful story. And we're so excited to have a conversation with and introduce to you. Today we're talking with Sarah Siegert, who is a loneliness coach for expats. She helps internationals to make friends so they can start loving their life abroad. And as someone who travels a lot and lived in foreign countries and probably never settled anywhere properly just yet, and try to maintain romantic relationships long distance and meeting people as an adult in new countries. It's an interesting conversation that we're gonna get into today. But without so much rambling to start off, I would love to welcome Sarah. Sarah, how are you today?
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really good. I'm very well. We just had a conversation. The weather here in the UK isn't that great, so I'm waiting for the summer. But apart from that, I'm good.
Yeah, the summer is tricky and unpredictable. No matter where you currently are in the world, it's always a question. So, Sarah, tell us a bit more about yourself. Who you are, what you do, maybe how you ended up being, coach for expats, focusing on loneliness and helping people find relationships, build relationships, and really love their life abroad.
Yeah, sure. So I am originally from Germany and I moved to the UK to London in 2019. And I moved here for my partner. I met him here a couple of months before that. And then we decided that I'm going to move to the UK. And that was my first time that I ever lived abroad. I've never had any experiences with that before. So everything was completely new and unknown. And to be honest, it was actually quite a pleasant experience, as in not many hiccups happened, like it went smooth. The only thing that I really, really struggled with was the loneliness and specifically giving up friendships and, leaving all the loved ones at home or the friends or the family. And that was something that I really, really struggled with when I moved to the UK, when I kind of tried to settle in here. And then obviously 1 year later, COVID hit. So that wasn't helpful at all to maintain long distance relationships and friendships. Because obviously we have all the kind of mediums to stay in touch and we can, UK to Germany isn't huge distance, so you can actually, see each other fairly regularly. But then when something like COVID hit, obviously it influenced all of us. And specifically when you have moved abroad and you try to maintain the contact with people, that was definitely difficult. Plus, it was difficult to make new connections. So that was the most difficult thing for me out of all of the ones when it came to adjusting to the new life in the UK. And so I decided to really hone in on that and really make it work for me. And I have always been supporting people and I have done lots of trainings and apprenticeships and things like that in this topic. So I always had that knowledge, but then through coaching and through really diving deep into how do we actually build friendships, like how do we connect with each other, confidence as well plays a huge role in making friends. So I really dived into that, made it work for me, and then decided that this is definitely something that probably at least one other person struggles with. And then once I started doing this work, I actually found out how many people really have difficulties with that in a different country, but also generally in their own country. And that's how I became a friendship coach.
It is such an interesting thing, and it's so relevant even to me. Like today, this weekend I went to Prague to a meetup of strangers who were brought together by a YouTube channel. So there is a YouTube channel called Yes Theory. They have this philosophy of seek discomfort, and somehow they have created an international community. And every now and then, every country, every city may have a virtual, maybe Facebook group. And out of nowhere, this Facebook group has decided to organize a meetup. People from around Czech Republic, from Slovakia, from abroad came. And we were planning like whole weekend. We planned sleepovers with the fact that we pretty much no one knew where we're going to sleep. It was massive discomfort for a lot of us, but because we were brought together by this same philosophy, by the same values, by this channel, that we kind of knew that we will get along with each other. So there are lots of things like that out there, but also it is so difficult to find things like that where you can meet friends and make friends as an adult, especially when you're potentially working from home, because when we're freelancing, it's so comfortable to work from home, no commute. But we also don't meet people. If you're not studying, if maybe you go to gym, but there's no community there, you don't want to go to bars, not even alone or even with a partner. So it's for me such an interesting question to like, where do you start? How do you identify the places to go out? How do you work with yourself to find this comfort and confidence to be able to go out there and meet people? So this is so interesting and so relevant. And we could definitely talk about lots of the similarities on our journeys, because I moved to UK for school, which was easier. But just before COVID, I moved back to the Czech Republic to my family home, and then COVID hit. So even though I have built a life abroad, that was the easier part, kind of. For me, the harder part was to now becoming a repat, being back in my own country, but having an online community, mostly with the people in the UK or around the world, and not knowing how to integrate back into my own country. Because I'm also a different person now than most of the Czech people around here. So I don't feel like I fit in here anymore. So if you move abroad, it's challenging when you come back. You're a different person, it's challenging. There's different cultural shocks when you go back, and there are different cultural shocks when you move somewhere else. So what is it that people can do when they know that they have a move like this ahead of them, that they're in a similar position like you? Maybe it's because of a partner, maybe it is because of a job, maybe it is because they just want to. How can they start preparing to avoid this scariness of loneliness? What can they do to start connecting with people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that you asked about what people can do before they even move, because that is something that, like, same with me, because that was the first time that I ever moved abroad. So if that is you listening now, it might be your first time, or even if it isn't, I think friendships and that social isolation is something that many people don't even think about and plan for when they move or when they are about to move abroad. So they plan for maybe the job, the apartment, like things like that. That's what is being, you know, advertised online, like checklists. You need to do this, 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 and this. But friendships and that social aspect is really not on the top of people's minds, and understandably so, because you just think, oh, I just move and it just happens. And I think people go into this whole making friends topic thinking that it's going to be something easy, or wanting it to be easy and natural, and not something that they have to put any effort in, or not as much effort in. And so then if it doesn't happen, because it isn't easy as adults, like it just doesn't, you know, no one's not going to knock on your door and is going to be like, hey, Sarah, I want to be your friend, right? So I think the expectation towards it is unfortunately setting many people up for failure, because they think it's going to be easy and it isn't, and then they don't do anything about it, and then they end up lonely. So I love that you asked that question about what to do before they even move, because that's a good point in time to start. So what people can do, I think the first step is always to really become aware of the current situation. So becoming aware when we want to make when we want to make friends, the biggest, like the first step that people have to work on is the relationship that they have with themselves. And what comes into play with that is the confidence, for example, or the level of self-worth, like how likable do I actually think I am? How much do I believe that if I move to London, that people there will like me for me, right? For who I am. If there are any aspects of that not being, let's not say 100%, but not being relatively high, then that will be the first thing that we all have to work on, is really becoming someone who thinks that they have something to offer, who thinks that people will like them, who has no issues speaking a foreign language, maybe, trying to use Google Translate and making your way around that. That is going to be the biggest step. So if you are about to move abroad, what I would recommend for you to do is to check in with yourself and see how good do I actually feel about myself? What comes up when I think about myself and myself meeting people, myself making friends? Where do I maybe believe that there will be some things that are missing? Where do I believe that people might not like me? And why do I believe that? And that is something that I would recommend really to tidy up before you even move and kind of get into this, because it will just get worse. That's another thing. When you move abroad, like you have maybe noticed, Lenka, when you move abroad, obviously you lose everything that was known. You're completely out of your comfort zone. So all the safety that you rely on when you are in your home country falls back, like falls away. So you are completely vulnerable and exposed. So everything that was there is just there 10 times more. So any self-worth doubts are just going to come out even more. So when you move abroad, that is something to really look at before.
And I love that you started with ourselves, because pretty much anything and everything in life, when we want to grow and improve and figure out, we need to start with ourselves. But I also think it's quite dangerous to get into the trap of staying way too connected with our friends and families remotely, because we can. Because right now we can stay connected because Zoom and WhatsApp and all the amazing technologies allow us to be so interconnected. So we can end up just being so attached to our phones and really just relying on those legacy relationships and all those virtual connections, where it's wonderful. Like, I love having friends all around the world and being able to have Zoom calls and WhatsApp calls and chat with people and still be connected with them and not lose the connection. And yet there is something magical and important and so essential to us to see real people in real life, like physically. I always say, like, I touch people, like obviously no inappropriate touching, but I mean to be in the physical space with people, to feel the energy of the environment. But what if someone, like both myself and Natalie will often say, we're introverts, we don't like people, we really like our books and our comfort zones. So what if someone is very shy and doesn't even know where to start meeting people? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I'm an introvert as well. I think what I'd like to maybe share a bit about is the kind of definition, or how I see introversion and extroversion, because I feel like there's a very common misconception about what it means to be an introvert and how it really shows up. So to me, the way that I think about introversion that serves me the most is that I am an introvert, and that means that I am gaining energy, that I'm recharging my batteries from spending alone time or quiet time or time with people where I really don't feel like I have to be someone that I'm not or pretend. So for me, that is my fiance, that is my closest friend. So I can spend time with them and I recharge my batteries through spending time with them or by myself, for example, reading a book or watching a show, something like that. Whereas extroversion, on the other hand, people that are extroverts recharge their battery spending time with people. So that might be a group of people, or that might be going to events, or after work, like going out for some drinks. That is how they recharge. And it's interesting because my partner, my fiance, is an extrovert and I'm an introvert. So it's a really interesting mix sometimes, because I'm just thinking, and I say to him, why would you want to do this? Like, it's so much nicer to just stay on the couch and, let's watch a film. But he really needs that. And that understanding really helps me to, first of all, not judge or have any, thoughts about him, and really understand where he's coming from, because I'm the same, just have different needs. So I think looking at it that way, being an introvert then only means that you have to have a good balance between alone time or whatever thing you want to do to recharge and social time. So one thing, if you are an introvert, is you have to really create that balance. And I have worked on creating that balance for myself. So I know I think for me, it's about 2 to 3 times a week maximum that I spend with other people. And because I have a job where I engage with many people anyway, so it's not like I'm just staring at the computer. I do talk to people. I have, video calls, engagement with people anyway. So based on that, I can only kind of meet people outside of that 2 to 3 times. That is how my balance works, and it works well for me. But you need to find out what that balance is like for you. So if you are an introvert and you have a very social kind of job anyway, it might just be once a week or 4 times a week. You just need to test and try this out. So once you've created a good balance through trial and error, it's really just about finding out about yourself. Like if you are into books, but you also want to meet people, a great opportunity to do that is maybe to go to some book clubs, right? So if you're an introvert, so your social batteries are maybe recharged, but they decharge or whatever the word is quite quickly, then you might not want to go to a 200-person event where you have to do small talk for 3 hours straight. So you just have to know yourself and what works best for you, and then include whatever interests you have into whatever things you're going to do and however you're going to spend your time. So you can really write down a list of things that you're into, books, astrology, yoga, whatever it might be. And then it's just about being creative and thinking about either in my local community or online, where can I find those people that are into the same things? There are obviously Google, Facebook groups, there are Meetup, it's a website. There are loads of different opportunities to find out where you can go in person or online to meet those people. But I think if you're an introvert, one thing that would be really important for me to share with you, don't use that against yourself and think that this is a barrier for you to make friends, because it isn't. It doesn't have to be unless you make it a barrier. And the other thing is just find a good balance. And introversion doesn't mean shyness. Like, I'm an introvert and I'm not necessarily shy. So that is a misconception I hear many people share with me. And I'm always thinking, like, it doesn't have to be. Like, you can really, connect with people and still be an introvert.
I think it's so important when we talk about these labels to put in a bit of a context.
Yeah.
I often also say that kind of introversion, extroversion is a scale, and not every single introvert will be different. Even myself and Natalie, we still are wired differently. I can tolerate a bit more people sometimes than her, and I recharge slightly differently than her. And you made such a great point that for introverts often is the case of maybe having smaller groups of people where we can go more in deeper, more meaningful conversations. And for example, the meetup that I mentioned that I went to over the weekend, there were 15 people, which for some people could be a lot. Some people can only really feel comfortable with 1, 2, 3 people. And they were complete strangers, but because we had already this common understanding, some sort of alignment, and there was no small talk, there were no basic questions. We went deep down into knowing ourselves and sharing ourselves and opening up vulnerably. It was a very safe space and very supportive space, even for introverts. And I could see even people who were a bit more shy and a bit more closed off, and this was a bit more out of their comfort zone, how quickly they have opened up, even though it was a long meetup and we were spending more than 24 hours together intensely, which could be a lot for someone. But it is, as you said, knowing yourself. And we had people who decided to tap out for a couple hours and go home and recharge, or just sit in a cafe in a corner, not to talk to us for an hour, and then come back. I think it's wonderful really to go back to your first point of like really know yourself. When it then comes to finding these things, I loved your little tips on, Facebook groups, events, meetups, Eventbrites, anything like that to go and meet people. But what if we then go out? We found an event, we brave ourselves to go to this meetup, and then we stand there awkwardly, or we don't know how to start a conversation, how to break the ice. Or we maybe have a bit of a small talk, but we don't know how to really then take the relationship to the next level of making it a real friendship. Like we can have a small talk, we maybe get to mingle and talk to people, but mingling and meeting people is not necessarily the same, and it doesn't have necessarily the same value to helping us battle loneliness as is having valuable, strong friendships. So, what is then the advice that you give to people to be able to break into some conversations and really open up to connect with people? And once they've done it, that they connected with few people, to build on the relationship and really establish something that will be valuable for both sides.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that is what most people struggle with. It isn't necessarily finding an event. We can all probably, use online services to find things. We might have heard about something. So that's not the problem. The problem for many people is actually going to the events, then having the first kind of conversation, then staying in touch and building a deeper connection with the people that they've met. And obviously, there is so much that I can talk about this because it really also depends on the person and what their experience is for me to really give that tailored advice. But generally, what I would say, first of all, knowing that it's going to be really nerve-wracking going to that event and not expecting it to be easy. Like if you are someone who is an introvert, who maybe is shy, who might have an okay level of self-confidence, but maybe it could be better, and even for me, when I go to events, even now, I still feel nervous. And I think just knowing that we will always, well, fair enough, but fairly always, feel nervous going to events where we don't know anyone, where we are in this very vulnerable state, because one of the biggest fears that we have is fear of rejection. If we go to an event where we don't know anyone, we like serve ourselves on this platter in front of however many people that we don't know, we are completely exposed to rejection, which is one of the scariest things that we can, imagine. So it is scary and it's meant to be scary. That really helped me to knowing that what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing isn't wrong and it's a normal human experience. That is the first thing. And then the second thing is knowing that it's scary, feeling scared and doing it anyway. Because many times when we feel scared, our brain doesn't want us to be scared, so our brain will do everything to prevent us from doing the thing that we're scared of. And so it's much easier to use any kind of excuse to come up with to not go to the event. It's raining, or I have an important meeting at work tomorrow, or anything. Your brain will come up with the smallest thing to prevent you, and a list of them. So knowing that, again, anticipating that your brain will try to do that, and just having an answer for your brain to be like, well, I know you don't want me to go. I know you think I'm not going to survive this potentially, because that's how dramatic our brains are, really. But knowing that this will come up and having a response, maybe something like, I want to go there because I want to meet people and I will do this. I will survive it. I will try my best to have a good time. And if I don't, then I will evaluate and see what I can do differently. But knowing this and working towards that can really help. And then once you are at the event and you're thinking about having conversations, again, the self-confidence really comes into play with that. Because if we aren't self-confident, if we don't feel worthy, if we haven't done that first initial work on ourselves, that is when it's going to show up first. So not being able to approach someone, but letting that fear of rejection maybe take over and just stand in the corner and maybe just watch. And that is maybe sometimes even a step for some people, right? Just actually bringing yourself to go there, even if you don't speak to people, but just being there for the first time can be a win. So don't expect too much of yourself either. But if you want to speak to people, if you feel okay to do that, there are loads of conversation starters and small talk like topics. You can even prepare for them, learn, like read through a couple of them, choose one, two, or three that you really like to learn them and revise them as if you're learning vocabulary or something like that to free your mind up from overthinking that in the moment so you can concentrate on the other person or on your body language. And when you have that conversation, I think that the second part of your question was, how do you actually build a deeper connection with people then? And obviously that takes time. It's like it takes up to 200 hours to actually build a relationship with someone who you would call a good friend. So that it's not just one meetup and then afterwards you're best friends. And that is, I think, again, something that is very difficult for people, especially nowadays, in our society where we have access to so much instant gratification. You know, one click, one press on our phone and we get food delivered, or we have that instant satisfaction just by receiving something so quickly. But relationships need time to build, and we need to trust the other person. We need to make memories, have a good time together, really have that feeling of we're being supported, we know each other, and that takes time. So from the first event to that, to get from that first event to that really deep connection, obviously you kind of need to find a way to stay in touch. So what I would always recommend at the first event is to have small talk, even though we all don't really like it, but it is important. Get on board with that. Just overcome the awkwardness. The awkwardness comes from you thinking it is awkward, or you expecting too much of yourself, or you thinking you should have said something different. That is where the awkwardness comes from. If you let go of that, and I know this is easier said than done, but this is why I'm here to, support with that. But once you let go of that, you can only have that conversation with someone, initially connect with them. And small talk is all about relating to each other. It's all about finding things to talk about, finding out information about the other person, relating back to that. It's all about seeing, like, are we a good fit or are we not really a good fit? But if you have someone who you really get on quite well with, it is that, again, scary question of, can I have your phone number? Or here's my phone number. I'd love to watch that film with you. Or I'd love for you to show me that restaurant you were talking about. Relating it back to the conversation and just finding a way to stay in touch. And then it's just being consistent with meeting up or staying in touch, sharing things. There's always I always think about connection as like a two-sided thing. So the connection in terms of a physical connection, so we see each other and we spend time with each other, but there's also the emotional connection. And that is something that we can create for ourselves towards the other person. So it isn't just about meeting up every day or like 5 times a week in order to build that connection. It's also about feeling connected to the other person, really finding evidence for why are we close, finding evidence for why do they care for us, why do they support us, and really leaning into that emotional piece is something that you can create yourself, right? You don't have to see each other every week even, but if you feel connected to that person, then that's half the work done.
These are some really fantastic tips, and one that I always use, and it's something I've picked up, especially living in the UK, is talk about the weather, because everybody's experiencing the weather. It's a non-personal topic. You don't have to get personal. You don't have to feel that you need to share personal information, because you can talk about the weather, and people have different experiences with the weather. And this is something I picked up having moved to the UK, is the English love to talk about the weather. And I'm often, when I go to South Africa, is why do you always talk about the weather? It's the same here all the time. It's like, but it's my way of communicating or just breaking that ice. And I have found that that's my go-to icebreaker, is ask about the weather. I think you had that, Sarah. The first thing I did was ask about the weather. But so yeah, it is really important to have these 1 or 2 questions that you can ask. So it's great advice. And I'm also what do you call them? An expat, I guess, but a foreigner essentially in a country. I mean, I moved from South Africa to the UK, Now, unlike you two ladies, I didn't have a language barrier, but there is still that language barrier because English in South Africa and English in England is not always the same, or not all the words are the same. We have more words that are in common with America and Australia than we did with England. And it's a simple thing like pants or trousers. It means exactly the same, except for where you are. So trousers in the UK are long-legged trousers, like jeans or suit trousers. But in South Africa and America, pants are trousers. But if you say pants in the UK, people are having visions of knickers and underwear. So it's a simple thing of learning, or essentially learning what words mean in where you're at. So yes, I spoke English at home in South Africa. England is an English-speaking country, but yet sometimes I got into quite a bit of trouble with the words that I was using. And some of the words that are very common in South Africa are actually quite rude here in the UK. So you can imagine. A lot of fun was learned. But it's not always a language barrier because you speak a foreign language and you're learning English. It can be a language barrier that the English meaning of an English word has two different meanings. And that is something that if you are going somewhere and you do speak the same language, maybe just have a realization in the back of your mind that some of the words might not mean exactly the same as they do where you're from. And it is quite something to move to a different country, especially if you're working from home. Or I did a lot of live-in care, looking after the elderly. So I didn't see anybody for about 3 years, except for 2 nights when I'd go back to London, stay with my brother, and then off I went somewhere looking after somebody who was either bedridden or never went out. So then it is difficult to build connections. And that was before Facebook and, Zoom and everything else. There was dark ages. So it's quite interesting how, you were talking about coming here and staying connected with, we got WhatsApp now, we've got Zoom, so it is much easier to stay connected with people who that familiarity. Oh my word. And just being able to connect. I mean, that was something that I really struggled with. Mobile phones were, not everybody had them. Yes, you had text, but if you wanted to text somebody overseas or to South Africa, it cost an absolute fortune. We had to buy these cards, and I'm showing my age here, but you got these phone cards, and you'd have to find a call box or ask permission for the people that you were living with, that you dialed in this like massive code, and then you dial in who you were phoning in the other countries, and getting deals. I mean, it was so complicated to just communicate with somebody. Internet wasn't like it was, email was just coming, especially for people who were traveling, or just, people like you and I. Yes, businesses had emails, but why would you have an email for just being you? So it's fascinating to think about the experience now to when it was 24 years ago. I mean, it was very isolating. And one thing that I have really starting to look into is I'm an extreme introvert. I don't generally like being around people, and I generally don't like people. So I've built a really, really small core of people who I have in my life. And it's very easy to, in that respect, it's very easy to become isolated. It's very easy. And I have to make an effort to not isolate myself. COVID was a great excuse for me to isolate myself. And then realizing, hang on a minute, I need to make an effort. And one of the things that got me going was I read a book called Together by Vivek H. Murphy. Sorry, I'm looking at it on my bookshelf. And he talks about friendship. He talks about loneliness. He talks about how loneliness can really impact and how when you don't reach out and build those friendships, how loneliness can affect you. And loneliness, when you're experiencing loneliness, you lose confidence, resilience. You lose your resilience. You can become unwell. You can sink deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is where, like you said, making that effort to just meet one or two people. Now, I'm talking as an extreme introvert. Just get to know one or two people. You don't need to have a huge list of friends and connections. I have an older half sister, and I've always been fascinated. She knows so many people. She has dinner parties, and her Christmas list of people who sends Christmas cards to is like massive. I think I've got like 3 people. It's but that's okay. So don't judge yourself on the amount of people that you have in your life. Judge more on the quality of the people you have in your life. And I think that's so important, because I always thought, but I don't have enough people. I don't know enough. I should, we use that word shoulding. I should know loads of people and have a lot of people and have a lot of connections and be messaging a lot of people, writing a lot of letters. No, if it works for you, go for it. But if it doesn't, just have the right amount of people, and you'll start to get a feel for who they are. And I think you shared some tools about that. It's just having the right connections, and even if you got to go out once a week or 3 or 4 times a week, see what works for you, see what brings joy or has that more life in one's life, because those connections are so important. Lenka mentions this event that she went to. Well, you'd have to put a gun to my head to make me go to something like that. But yet we're both introverts. So it just shows how different introverts can be. And again, extroverts, there's the scale of extroverts as well, because some extroverts don't like a lot of people. So it is not using that label as an excuse, but seeing what works. How can you find the right balance in that? So thank you for sharing all these tips and just these different ways of finding your feet in a foreign country. So Lenka's asked you sort of what you can do, but I'd like to ask you as speaking a different language. So if somebody's going to a country that they don't necessarily speak the language, they might not speak the language well, what sort of advice would you give them, having experienced it for yourself? I mean, I know we can learn a new language, but it's one thing to learn a language and then to have the confidence to speak the language. I mean, whenever I go to Germany, my German is quite bad, but I hate speaking German in Germany because I get it all wrong and my grammar is wrong, which then means I keep quiet. So as a foreign speaker, what advice would you give for anybody who's going to a different country and wanting to settle there and they don't necessarily speak the language, or it's not their mother tongue?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think first, most blunt answer is really try your best to learn the language for your own sake. But that's not what we're trying to discuss here, right? But it is so helpful because there's no way around it, right? Like the more of the language you know, the better it will be, the easier it will be. So that is definitely my first, and probably not the advice that maybe we wanted to hear, but it is like the most important thing to really learn the language. But apart from that, wherever you are at, like with the level of language skills that you have now, I think what you said is so important. Going to a different country, knowing the language, but not wanting to speak the language because you get things wrong, you muddle things up, the grammar is wrong. That is what you have to be willing to do. You have to be willing to say things wrong. You have to be willing to be potentially laughed at, like it isn't nice. But the thing is, you have to be willing to put yourself out there to get whatever reaction that you get, and then it's up to you, what do you want to make that mean. So if I say something, like I said loads of things wrong when I first came here, my level of English was quite good because I learned it in school for I don't know how many years, 10 years or something like that. So I was able to definitely communicate, but there were loads of different words I didn't know, loads of pronunciations that I got completely wrong, that I was, laughed at for. But then that is what you then have to take responsibility for. So the willingness to say things however you know them, and the more you know, the better, because it will happen less and less. But if you have whatever language like level, you have to be willing to say the thing that you think is right. And if it's wrong and people react to it, you then have to take the responsibility of making it mean something that doesn't hurt you. And that's what happens oftentimes, is that when we say something, I can't remember what it was. I mispronounced city completely wrong, because it was spelled in a way that I thought I said it right, but it wasn't at all. And so I was laughed at that for. And then I could have made it mean very easily something like, I don't ever say anything right. I don't want to say this again. They are laughing at me because at me as a person, versus I've said something wrong because this is my second language, because I was nervous in this scenario, or they're laughing at not me, but at the words, at the pronunciation. So this is very different, right? Like one thing is taking it personally, probably preventing us from saying something again in the future because we think it means so much more than it actually potentially does, versus seeing it as something not personally, not as a personal attack, but actually just as, oh, that person found it funny how I pronounced that word. And that's okay. I think I would have laughed. I think I did actually laugh as well when I heard the actual pronunciation. But I think it is really for us to take responsibility about what we make it mean if we say the wrong thing, and not let that defeat us. Because, like you say, it is very easy to prevent that kind of rejection, right? We're worried about being personally rejected. We're worried about being personally judged. And then if we, for example, say the wrong word or pronounce it in a different way, it's easy to take that personally as a personal rejection or judgment, whereas it isn't. But if we do, then we might stop saying anything at all. We become very quiet, or we become maybe defensive, or something that isn't helpful and isn't actually accurate, an accurate reflection of the situation either. So that would be my advice, to be willing to say the wrong thing and then to take responsibility over how we react to it, what we make it mean, if there is a reaction to the words that we're saying or the way we pronounce them.
It's so true that in the UK, some of the names of the cities and towns, you would never guess the way they pronounce. And I had the same experience the first time coming to UK. I knew that my university is pronounced Loughborough, somewhere in Midlands. The spelling definitely does not suggest it's supposed to be pronounced Loughborough. And then we had to take a train to nearby town, which looked like it should be read like Leicester, but obviously it's read Leicester. Who would have known? And I still remember coming out of the plane in London Heathrow, trying to book this ticket, and the lady at the till looking at us like we're crazy. Like, like which town? Where do you want to go? We're like, this. I was like, oh, you mean Leicester? I was like, sure. And I think it may be, for what helped to me in this circumstance, was to start hanging out with more expats. That's why you often have the tendency to then hang out, not necessarily fully with natives, but found a group of people who are in a similar boat as you are. And to me, the biggest boost of self-confidence to really start speaking English properly when I moved to UK was hearing other people mispronouncing things and making mistakes and being absolutely fine with that, and no one laughing at them and no one correcting them and everyone just trying to understand each other. I think for me, that helped a lot.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I obviously moved here for my partner, so I spent time with him mainly. He was brought up here, he grew up here, he has loads of friends here and family members and everything. So I 99% hang out with English people, with locals, with natives. And so I never had that experience of other internationals. I did make some other international friends along the way, but mainly I socialized with other English people. And so I think, again, it really comes down to what do you make it mean? So when I was saying something, and I remember now, it was Gloucester that I thought was pronounced Gloucester or something completely silly like that, but very similar to Leicester. It's just that weird way it's worded and written. But when I said that, then we had a quick laugh about it, and then I was corrected for the right way of saying it, and I was grateful for that. Whereas you can also take it as, oh, I have to be careful what I'm saying and how I say it, because I'm always being corrected and people are always commenting on what I say. So it really depends how we view it. And the other thing that came to mind when you said about hanging out with experts, because when I work with internationals, they oftentimes come to me and say, look, I've got this network of expats or other internationals, but they find it difficult because, first of all, they tend to move away again. So other expats, they are there for like 2 years or something like that, and then they move away again. So they kind of continuously build new connections that then not necessarily come to an end, but are being, go through a big change of someone moving again. And so they feel burned out to really start from scratch every year or two because their friends keep moving away. And the other big thing that people struggle with when they, as internationals, make friends with other internationals is that they feel like it's not the same on the level of being able to settle in. Like they feel like they are in this expat bubble, but they yet haven't really managed to integrate and make friends with the locals. And it means that they aren't integrated and settled in properly and that they don't belong. And there's this whole really story that people created for themselves about what it means to have other international friends, but they make it mean that it's something kind of negative or they're not yet there. And plus they're burned out having to start all over again, which then leads to them just giving up on it and just isolating themselves because they're just fed up with the idea of continuously having small talk, getting to know, building a connection, and then losing it again. So it's a really interesting aspect also to think about as internationals living abroad, making friends with other internationals versus with natives and what comes with both. I mean, there's no right or wrong way of doing it, right? And I think when you said, Natalie, as well, like the idea of there's a right amount of friends that we should have, or there's a right amount of connections we should have, like we should know more or we should have more people. I think that is, like you said, a very hurtful thought to have, really a very, very painful thing to consider, because there is no right or wrong. Like for you, it's, for one person it's 10, for the other person it's 3, and whatever works for you is the right thing. So I think just thinking about we should do something, or there should be that right way that we should cohere by, that there is no right thing, no right way, no right amount.
The shoulding all over yourselves is something that Lenka has taught me, and I've adopted that. And it is we live so much with I should, or I should be this, or I should do this. I find it actually difficult to be around fellow South Africans because a lot of them are very much, yes, but in South Africa we do it like this. Yes, but in South Africa is a very different country. It's I think English might be the only common thing, but it's run very differently. I mean, their seasons are totally opposite. There's different. You can't necessarily compare the two, and I find that quite difficult. Like I said, this is my personal experience. I found that being around South Africans, at first, I wanted to be around South Africans because it's familiar. It's a familiar accent. They understand what pants means without getting all funny. And there's just the odd little words that we use, the way that we do time, and that, for South African listeners, the just now, and they know what that means, and it's something that is not necessarily something that an English person would know, because it's not an English phrase or colloquialism or whatever they call it. But I have found over time it's actually been easier to start to build English friends and connections, because first of all, this is where I'm living, but it's not always this comparison. So I did find that it was easier to integrate with more the English, because then I would learn more, and I felt that I would then not feeling as much of a foreigner. And, when I go back to South Africa, and it's something that I'm thinking about moving back to South Africa, and as Lenka said, is the culture shock of now having been out of South Africa I'm going on 25 years now. It's a different country to the way it was when I was there. Things have changed, and it's going to be like going back to a foreign country and having to learn it all over again. And yet trying not to think, yes, but when I was younger, we could just do this or we could do that. So it's quite interesting how different things can be. But I just wanted to share that in case some of our listeners were wondering about the expats or not the expats. I'm not saying don't associate with people from the same country and the same language as you. I know that a lot of sort of Polish people like to be around Polish people because it's a language thing as well. I mean, like I said, for me, it was easy because it was English. The odd words didn't make sense, but essentially it's the same language. I didn't have to learn a new language. And I know that sometimes it can be quite stressful having to communicate in a language that you're not comfortable with, that you are not fluent with yet. And so it's easier then to maybe just stick around being with the same people or people who speak the same language as you, because it's not as tiring, it's not as exhausting, and there's that commonality. But one thing that I have noticed over the years is that when you do that, the drawback can be you don't learn to speak English as well, because you are very much isolating yourself from the English language, other than maybe when you're at work or something. So you can isolate yourself if you do stick with that. And that's something that I have noticed with some people that I've associated with over the years, is that isolation, because you're not immersing yourself in English and you connecting with the language of your mother tongue, basically. And that can be a positive thing, but like anything, there's always two sides. It can also be a negative thing. It takes you longer to learn to communicate, and of course the longer it takes, the more insecure you can become, which then means that you don't do it. So it has that vicious cycle. So it's fine. It's, again, like with everything, it's having that balance. It's finding that balance that is so important. So it's there is no right, there's no wrong, there's no you shoulds, there's none of the shoulding all over yourself. Is find what works for you. Does that all make sense? Good. It's nice when people nod. I like when people nod.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Do you want to hang out with people from your own country? And I hear that a lot as well from clients that say, I moved abroad and I found someone who was also from the country that I'm from, just to have someone to hang out with, because and the only thing we had in common was that we came from the same country. And then they end up actually in these friendships and these connections that aren't actually really aligned with who they are and what they want and their values, but just on that similarity of we're from the same country, we speak the same language. And I think that might be another aspect to think about. It's not just, settling for the first best thing just so that you're not alone, but actually even that might be okay in the beginning when you really don't know anyone. You are probably quite glad to have at least someone. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest for you not to do that. But I think at some point it might be worth and might be time to really check in and evaluate, like, what do I actually want out of a friendship? The current connections, how do they align with that? And is it maybe time to maybe disconnect or distance myself a little bit from maybe those early connections where I just kind of clinged onto someone so that I have someone, and constantly just evaluating, because we change, like we said, maybe even moving back to our country that we are originally from, we would have changed so much. And I think I always think about that aspect of how would that be? And I always think about that for myself, and I can't actually wrap my head around how it would be, but I have heard from many people that it is incredibly difficult to do that, and I can only imagine. And yeah, so respect for anyone who is moving back, because I think, like you said, Lenka, that is potentially even more difficult than moving abroad the first time, because you have the expectation. I don't know what it is. I think for me it would be the expectations of maybe how it was, and then having a completely whole different experience. And we see each other in this different light then as well. Maybe when we, like now in the UK, I know I'm different, but I might not have realized how different I was, or what areas I actually became different. But then moving back to this old setting, I might actually realize that. So constantly, the reason why I said this was to, things change, we change, other people change. So with friendships as well, we want to constantly really evaluate, are we still kind of aligned? Does it still match up with what we want? Are we still a good fit? And if not, maybe to either verbalize that and reconnect if we want that, or maybe to draw the conclusions of, okay, that friendship has had its time, and season of that friendship might come to an end, and then we move on, and we learn from it if we want to or can, and move on and make some new connections that are more aligned with who we are, maybe after we move to a different country, or maybe even just after life happens. We all change so much.
And I think this is an important point that you're making, that, not every relationship has to be best friends for life. That, yes, we don't want to be in a position that we need to rebuild our whole ecosystem and rebuild our friendship group every couple of months or years, because it is exhausting and it's very time demanding to do that. But we also don't want to be clinging on relationships just because we had wonderful times together. That doesn't mean that that we will have to be friends forever, and it doesn't mean that if we don't talk to each other for a couple of years, then we're no longer friends, and there's no future for us. I had a very random reconnection with a friend from high school, and we kind of lost. We were besties at high school, and we had a different university experiences, and somewhere around uni time we just fell out. I don't even remember why, but I remember just we stopped talking out of nowhere. And then life went on, and 10 years later we randomly bumped into each other. Both had very different adulting experiences of becoming adults, and it felt like no time has passed, and anything that has happened before has been forgiven or forgotten. And we immediately went into like being super good close friends, and having obviously all the legacy and all the memories, and yet new things to discover. But sometimes it is that relationship is there for a couple months, couple years, and it's been great times, and there's no need to hold on to it and then make it sour just because we don't want to let go. I'm just loving this conversation. There's so much that we could go into, be it working on ourselves, connecting with others, tips and tricks, and finding ways to overcome our fears and anxieties, practical tips on, how to ask better questions, or how to do introductions, or how to build relationships. There's so much that we could go into. But I will give you the space to give us a little bit more. So if there is a final tip and a final insight, if there's something that we're hoping to talk about and we haven't asked you about it, now's your time to share like a final closing words of wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. I think we touched probably on quite a few aspects of friendships. Like you say, Lanka, there is so much more that we can talk about and go into detail about. I think as a closing kind of summary, I think I just want to share with everyone really the the importance of friendship. And I think Natalie, you were sharing about that earlier in terms of the effects of loneliness and how detrimental really the effects of loneliness are on our physical health, mental health, that people can look into that just using Google, do a quick Google search and really read into this. It is incredibly important for us. And I think we all have witnessed obviously during COVID, even though maybe for some, Natalie, for me, it was quite a, not to sound horrible, but quite an enjoyable time as well, not to having to feel the need to kind of be uncomfortable, because at that time I really haven't done that work as much on myself. So I was really trying in my comfort zone, trying to be there and not move out and not do anything uncomfortable, because making friends was uncomfortable for me at the time. So COVID was nice, but I know that it was a very difficult time for many people suffering with social isolation, not seeing their loved ones, and it had effects on me too. So I think we all kind of had a taste of how important connection is and how important friendships are. And I think just to really understand that and put an emphasis on maybe working on that actively. I think the other thing, like I mentioned in the beginning, many people have that misconception that it should be easy and should just happen naturally. But I think the older we get, the less time we have, the less kind of contact points. Like in school, we see the people there every day for, I don't know, 8 hours or however long we go to school for, I can't remember, for 5 days a week, right? For years and years. And obviously, we will build a connection with those people. Then when we get older, we might, go to university, relatively similar thing happens there. We spend a lot of time with someone organically. But then when we get older, we might now, after COVID, work from home, we might, have a family, like married, have kids, move somewhere else, like especially in London prices of properties, you unless you're incredibly rich, can't really afford it. So many friends of ours have actually moved out. So just life just happens. And the more, the older we get, the more we really have to put a conscious work, like put a conscious emphasis on this or conscious work into creating those connections. And I think many people haven't like heard of that or understood this or thought about it even. And they just think, oh, I don't know, it just should just be something that happens, but it isn't. And I think if you understand the importance of friendships and understand that it isn't something that will just happen naturally, I hope for you that you will understand that this is actually something that you want to spend time on, that you want to, not to make 300 friends, but for whatever, like we said, what works for you, find this out and then really fill your cup, like meet those people, build those connections, however that looks like for you, but really understanding that it is so important. And I hope that this has helped for people to really gain that understanding and to maybe get some motivation or to get some tips to get this going and to really want to do this. I hope for everyone listening that they want to do this. And if they don't want to do this, then don't even start because you're not going to follow through on it probably. But really wanting to do this for your own sake, for your health, for your happiness in life. So I hope that helped. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think this is such an important message to get across, that we need to want it. We need to realize and acknowledge the importance of connections, and we want to be willing to put in the time and effort, because it will unfortunately often force us to step outside of our comfort zone, and it will take time and effort and energy. And it is sometimes way more easier just stay at home, read a book, watch Netflix, hang out with your cat. That's nice too. But we do need each other. We need other people. We need a stimulation. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, to share some really insightful and valuable practical tips and tricks. And if there's anyone out there who's thinking, okay, I'm getting the feeling that this is something that I need to work on this, but they still don't feel that they can do it themselves. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, definitely. So the best way probably to find me and also have a look into my work is on Instagram. You can find me there on friendships.abroad. And otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, my name, Sarah Siegert. I'm on Facebook. So there are loads of different ways to find me. But yeah, I would love to even have a chat with you. So if you listen to this and you feel like this is something that you actually want to actively contribute some time to, but you don't know where to start, or you need some more tips or any way that I can help you, just reach out, because it is something that is very important to me to help people overcome their loneliness and make connections. So let me know if I can help you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been wonderful. And to you, our listeners, we would love to ask you if this is something that you have experienced with, if you've moved around. Sometimes even from a city to city, half across the country could be a difference. If it's a big country, it doesn't have to always be even moving abroad. Have you found it challenging to find new friends? What did work for you? What was the one thing that really allowed you to connect with new people in a new place? We would love to hear from you. And until next time, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed listening to our conversation, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe. We would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and write a short review.